Good morning, First Presbyterian Church. This is Marvin Lindsay, and this cup holder chat, which, alas, is a mobile cup holder chat this morning. I'm going to keep my eyes on the road, I promise. Is about the latest thing I did for the 21-day Racial Equity Habit Building Challenge. I did something from the Notice tab, and I sat down yesterday evening and I wrote down some of the last books I've read, TV shows I've watched, movies I've watched, and thought about representations in them of non-white folks, and also about the creators, the authors, the producers. And so the first embarrassing thing is that I haven't read many books lately, but I am in the middle of listening to an audiobook by Malcolm Gladwell called Blink. And it's about how snap decision-making can sometimes be better than long, drawn-out decision-making processes. But what's interesting is I'm reading the second section of the book right now where he's talking about the pitfalls of snap decision-making. And one of them is racial bias, because he describes this experiment where you've got words, they're kind of good and bad words, and you have to sort them into good and bad categories. And then they complicate that by putting in there words like a white person or a black person. And what happens is, and they measure the response time, I think you're pushing a button or something, it becomes harder for you to sort the good words into good categories if you've just heard a reference to a black person or an African American. And so this experiment, and the book is, I think it goes back to 2005. I don't know what research has done since then. It points to what we've been talking about in society these last maybe 5 to 7 years, the problem of implicit bias, that we have these unconscious biases in favor of whites and against blacks that we're not aware of, but you can measure them down to response times. And everyone seems to have these biases, is what Gladwell says. And Gladwell is biracial. So it seems like in our culture we have a problem of maybe excessive pride on the part of white people and unreasonable fears or anxieties on the part of white people at an unconscious level, and a kind of mirror image problem of self-loathing, low self-esteem, distrust of self on the part of racial ethnic minorities. And I know that there's a whole industry out there trying to address this problem, and I heard the beginning of an article on the public radio station about how many of these approaches are effective, how many of them are not effective. And now, of course, there's a whole lot of debate about is this even the right approach? Maybe what we need to do instead is have legislation and laws that direct public resources in ways that will hopefully close the education and income gaps between racial ethnic minorities and white folks. It raises a whole lot of issues. But that's the one book I've been reading. The TV shows that I've watched, I sat down and noticed that they often sort of have a set, kind of like there's like 3 to 4 main characters, and there's some form of racial and gender representation there. So, for instance, what did I watch? I watched Barry, the first 2 seasons of Barry on HBO, about an assassin who's trying to go straight. And there's basically Barry and his on-again, off-again girlfriend. They're both white. There's the acting teacher played by Henry Winkler, and his love interest, who is an African-American woman, a police detective. And a lot of the recent TV shows have kind of followed that pattern, the ones that I've watched, like The Good Place. The Good Place, you've got a cast of 5. You have a woman, a South Asian woman. You have an African-American man. You have a white female, a white male, and a Latino male. So it's sort of like you've got this kind of core group that represents the diversity of the viewing audience. But whether the stories that they're telling sort of further racial equality or reinforce racial stereotypes, I haven't thought too much about that at this point. I am aware of the fact that there is a kind of canon now of African American literature, going back to books, that I am woefully ill-read in. And so I need to finish. So again, I need to read more in general, watch less TV, do less internet surfing, and I need to start exploring that canon. That I think that needs to be my informal curriculum going forward. So anyway, that's what I noticed when I looked at my list of movies and TV shows and books. Let me know in the comments what you're noticing. What are you reading? Are you reading books written by and about white folks mostly, or about racial ethnic minorities? Let me know in the comments. And take care and have a good morning.